there he is. Hey, Ken. So Ken Wisniewski is one of our senior cybersecurity solutions architects here at SARES. He works with our clients to understand and solve some of their most complex cybersecurity challenges. His areas of expertise include cloud security, network and gateway security, endpoint mobile security, and security monitoring and operations. And prior to joining SARES, Ken led the network security team at a Fortune 100 financial institution, where he managed a various array of network security technologies. And if he looks a bit sleepy, let's give him a break. He and his incredible wife, Kelsey, just recently welcomed a new baby girl, not but a few months ago. So congratulations as well on that. Ken, I'll turn it over to you, sir.
Thank you for the introduction, Chris. Chris has already done the introduction for me, so I'll introduce the topic at hand. So I'm going to be talking about SASE. SASE obviously being one of Gartner's kind of newest buzzwords for security technologies over the last couple of years. And we're going to talk about, what SASE is, how do we define it, what are the typical vendor approaches to becoming a SASE or calling themselves SASE, and how best to begin your journey evaluating this space and where does it fit in your organization. So with that said, obviously SASE stands for the Secure Access Services Edge. And based on name alone, right, we're talking about solutions that are going to deal somewhat with security, obviously. They're going to deal with access. They're perhaps delivered as a service, and they're delivered in some form of an edge capacity, right? Just breaking it down from that perspective. And so what are the core things that define a SASE technology? So Gartner's definition, they would say that SASE is ultimately the combination of these 5 core technologies: software-defined WAN, firewall as a service, secure web gateway, cloud access security brokering, and zero trust network access. And one of the things you'll note about these is that none of them are particularly new things. Some are newer than others. Some have been around for many, many years at this point. And in all honesty, a lot of organizations already have done deployments or are already leveraging one or more, in most cases, of these technologies, albeit independently. And so what SASE is aiming to do is to consolidate some of these technologies. And of course, this isn't exhaustive. There are a lot of other features that get bundled under that overall umbrella of the Secure Access Services Edge. But ultimately, what SASE is, at a one-line definition, is the consolidation of networking and security technologies delivered as a scalable service from the cloud. And so, you may have cloud-based security solutions, but just because they are offered from the cloud does not ultimately mean that they are SASE. We're looking at solutions that do more than just, perhaps one thing. So before we get too much in, right, let's have a session or a discussion, a brief history lesson about, vendor consolidation, feature consolidation. Most of you are probably aware of the next generation firewall. This is, I would have said relatively new, but it's been around for, I think, over 10 years now in terms of a term that we've used in the network security space. And fundamentally, the next generation firewall has been one of the most successful technologies, I think, from an adoption perspective of network security tech in a while, right? I mean, since maybe the original firewall, many, many years ago, the next gen firewall has been very, very widely adopted. And so why has it been so widely adopted? Why was the next generation firewall, among all of the technologies that we have in network security and cybersecurity, et cetera, why has it been such a great success? And I personally believe that boils down to 3 main things. One is consolidation. Obviously, the next gen firewall was a consolidation play, bringing together disparate technologies like firewall, IDPS, proxy, antivirus, web filtering, et cetera. But it also aimed to simplify those things. So by consolidating, we could deploy a smaller number of appliances on the network. We could simplify our network security strategy, and we could ideally get an improvement in terms of management with those capabilities as well. So it should not just bundle together technologies, but also simplify them from a management perspective. And then finally, integration. So part of the benefit of having a bunch of different technologies and capabilities under one vendor platform is that they have authoritative control over what those features do and how they interoperate with one another. And so, taking a specific example, right? Say a technology that does malware sandboxing detects a malicious URL when detonating malware. Well, they can immediately turn around and inject that URL into a URL filtering engine that they control to broaden and expand the capabilities that they offer. And that was something that was very challenging to do prior to having a consolidated and cohesive platform. And so if you've been dealing with network security for some time, you may recall that really the next generation firewall, at least in its original iteration description, wasn't something really that new. We had UTM, or Unified Threat Management platforms, prior to the next generation firewall becoming a thing. But where UTM kind of fell down is on that simplification typically and those integration components that I mentioned. They they may have brought the features together, but they didn't really become a better sum of those parts, and they didn't ease the management or implementation of those tools. So when we talk about SASE, we want to make sure that it's not just another UTM technology where we're bringing together a bunch of features and functionality, but we're not really improving upon the integration of those things or simplifying the ease of management and ease of use. So what are the core benefits that we look to these SASE platforms for? One of the first ones is that they are delivered as a service, as software as a service. And along with that type of a deployment comes a number of benefits. Things like service resiliency, automatic scaling for performance is a huge selling point for these technologies. Obviously, simplicity of deployment, and that ties into whether you're deploying a heavy appliance at the edge, right? I ideally want to move away from that to a light type of branch or edge deployment where we don't need multiple appliances or even a single heavy appliance performing these edge security controls at the perimeter. We can ship that traffic out to a service solution that scales on demand. In addition to that, these are often or should be globally distributed, or at the very least regionally distributed depending on what your needs are, solutions. So these technologies are not a single entity, or they're not a single appliance. They are globally distributed. They should exist near to where your users exist, whether that's a branch office in a particular region of the world, or that's a user base that is remote that happens to exist in a certain area. And so this infrastructure, this technology should follow or be able to follow where your users actually are. And that, of course, improves performance, reduces latency, and increases the user experience dramatically. And then finally, we talked about consolidation, and that is ultimately what SASE is a consolidation play yet again. Bringing together the core capabilities to do internet egress security. So, you're applying your traditional stack of application control, URL filtering, threat detection and prevention, data leakage prevention, SaaS application control, SSL and TLS decryption. The list goes on. And of course, it will somewhat vary vendor to vendor, but ultimately they're looking at securing that egress internet capability, whether that is at a individual branch office or a remote user sitting at a Starbucks. Their egress controls and capability should be very similar, if not the same. They're also looking to secure internal application access, and this gets into the ZTNA type or remote access VPN type of capabilities, the authentication and connection brokering that a lot of those solutions do. And so again, you're as a user or as a branch office connecting through a brokered service to then gain access to the applications on a granular identity-based basis in your data centers or in your cloud environments. And then finally, network interconnectivity. Right? Obviously, SD-WAN was one of the core capabilities that Gartner has identified as being a component of SASE, and not every vendor that claims to do SASE will have SD-WAN. In a lot of cases, as we'll see in a little bit, a lot of them aim to integrate with those things, but some of the solutions do offer the ability to do network interconnectivity in lieu of or in addition to SD-WAN. And so that's certainly a component, and that gets into MPLS replacement perhaps, or VPN replacement, and a number of use cases there. And then finally, and perhaps one of the most important elements to a SASE solution, and therefore the consolidation of many solutions, is how flexible they are from a policy perspective, in terms of being able to apply different controls to different devices, to different sources and destinations, or user groups. And so Gartner has actually a pretty great diagram that they had put together here that depicts the specific, this kind of a situation, right? We on the left-hand side have different users coming from different types of devices or different IoT devices, and we can apply with the right technology the right solutions to those specific entities. So whether it's a user going to Salesforce, we might apply a particular set of controls, DLP, for example, or we might not let users upload files to box.com or things like that. Alternatively, right, we may not care about that for an IoT device that's connecting to our network, but we still want to gain behavioral analysis, or we want to look for command and control type traffic from those devices. And so the flexibility of having a very broad feature set, but being able to be very prescriptive in how those are deployed is a core capability of what SASE should bring to the table. So what SASE is not. It is not a security appliance. If a vendor tells you, here's my box, it's SASE, they have missed the mark dramatically. It should be deployed, again, as a service. It should be a scalable solution. It should be, quote unquote, in the cloud, as opposed to on-premise equipment in the vast majority of cases. Now, some may involve some form of an on-prem deployment for certain use cases or capabilities, but in general, this is deployed as a service. SASE is also, it is not zero trust. It may be a component of a zero trust strategy, but no vendor, no technology, no specific capability can really claim to be zero trust by itself. I even take a little bit of an issue with the zero trust network access as a product technology in a lot of ways. It is more a philosophy and a approach than it is a technology. Furthermore, SASE is not an infrastructure as a service solution. It is not a security stack of a bunch of appliances that someone's deployed in a colo facility for you. And it should not be a point product specifically that handles one use case. The whole benefit here is the scalability and the consolidation of capabilities for your network security needs, deployed in a cloud type environment. So from a vendor perspective, and I'm not going to talk about any specific vendors, but everyone these days seems to be claiming to do or to be a SASE technology. And if you've been in IT at all for the last couple of years, you've probably gotten marketing bombardment and sales pitches from a who's who of vendors that claim that they do some form of SASE. But obviously they can't all possibly be doing the same thing. And so their approaches to SASE are certainly going to vary. And I've found, at least personally, that those approaches vary or differ along the lines of where those vendors kind of started out and what their core functionality is. So as we look at those 5 core pillars of components that Gartner claims are the most important in SASE, right? Our secure web gateway, firewall as a service, cloud access security brokers, zero trust network access, and SD-WAN. Those are typically the places where vendors started or are coming from to approach the SASE marketplace. And really the one notable thing here is that there aren't, at least to my knowledge, any new vendors that are specifically SASE. They almost exclusively started in one of these areas and either expanded their feature set via internal in-house development or made acquisitions or partnerships with other third parties to broaden, to fill out more of those capability sets. So as we start here, secure web gateway, these are vendors obviously that focused on web and URL access and security controls around those things. But how are they addressing the SASE market? Certainly, they've got some of the internet egress security capabilities covered already, but they need to cover more than just that one use case. So typically, they're building or adding CASB type SaaS security capabilities or zero trust network access. In many cases, both of those things. Actually, we've seen a big consolidation of capabilities from the proxy type based solutions around SWIG, ZTNA, and CASB. One notable there, none of those vendors, at least thus far, have built their own or deployed their own or acquired an SD-WAN capability. They, for the most part, are partnering with SD-WAN. Certainly, they allow you to on-ramp their technology with a third-party SD-WAN vendor, but with maybe one exception I can think of, they don't have that built in-house, and I don't know that it's on their necessarily roadmaps to do so. And so we'll talk a little bit about that later. The firewall as a service vendors, these of course are route-based solutions. They're your kind of traditional remote access VPN, but applying that in a cloud-based solution or a remote branch IPsec tunnel to cloud for enforcing your security controls. And there are pros and cons. Obviously, out of the box, these are your firewall vendors traditionally that are taking this approach. They've got a firewall technology. They're going to deploy it for you in the cloud, and they're going to offer a similar set of capabilities. But certainly, they do have support for typically remote office type approaches as well as remote user approaches, which are two of the core pillars to what SASE should offer. CASB, again, these are SaaS heavy applications and solutions. They, generally out of the box didn't have an internet egress outside of SaaS integration, and they didn't have a internal application access capability, but typically those are the directions that they seem to be going, again, integrating with or building their own secure web gateway type functionalities. To do that, again, they're not going to have SD-WAN or the network side covered as well. But again, they will cover typically remote user and remote branch type of use cases. ZTNA approaches. So ZTNA, of course, being zero trust network access. This is probably the most specific use case or component of SASE solutions. And I haven't really seen them expand much outside of that. Some are broadening into CASB areas in terms of applying that zero trust access to SaaS applications, but generally they're limited to kind of that access to the applications that you are aware of and that you already control. And so they either need to integrate with or to grow their capabilities with secure web gateway or integrate with SD-WAN. And then finally, the SD-WAN focused vendors. These are your traditional SD-WAN. They're in some cases adding on security firewalling type capabilities or secure web gateway type of functionality to SD-WAN. I would say they're maybe the farthest behind in some cases regarding security, but again, they're pretty open in terms of being able to integrate with some of the other vendor categories that I've talked about here. And so certainly there are pros and cons, and obviously they do the network optimization piece of this better than most of the others. So how should you approach a SASE project, within your organization? So I would push this down to three or four main areas. So the first is gap analysis. We want to understand what vendors you have already. More than likely, some of them have or claim to do some form of SASE capability, but you have to obviously weigh that against what they're going to do in the future and what your actual use cases are. Just because you have a given vendor doesn't mean that that's necessarily the right one to adopt wholesale moving forward. In terms of needs and immediate needs, it's good to evaluate if you have a specific remote user use case, for example. it might make sense to adopt a technology that offers a broader suite of SASE capabilities specifically for that remote user workforce demand. I mean, we saw over the past year huge growth in that area in terms of adoption for or migration from traditional remote access VPN towards these as a service deployed solutions. Additionally, from a network redesign or transformation, SD-WAN has been a huge proponent of pushing organizations towards this, and actually fits really well with a broader SASE rollout and can be an opportunity to deploy SD-WAN alongside a security-focused SASE solution at the same time across your branch deployment. And then, of course, vendor identification is going to be key. As with all consolidation, simplification and maintaining or improving capabilities don't always go hand in hand. In the short term, don't be afraid to declutter or simplify your environment and perhaps lose a little bit of capability in the short term for a broader simplification, ease of use, and ease of management gain. And then really, don't be afraid to test these solutions. These vendors are all claiming performance and user experience gains over what you have today. You really need to make sure that what they're claiming fits for your specific use cases and applications, because that's not always the case. And then finally on that topic, make sure to phase in an implementation. Don't try to boil the ocean. Don't try to deploy every last component of SASE all at once. Pick an area, adopt, and then grow your expansion as you need to. Final area, pitfalls to look out for when adopting or looking at SASE. Single solutions are not really a SASE solution. You want to make sure that if the vendor you have or are looking at only covers like maybe one of those 5 areas, that they have an aggressive roadmap to adopt or to expand that capability. Otherwise, you're going to be kind of stuck with a point solution, which is ultimately one of the things SASE really shouldn't be, is a specific point solution in the long term. As they're claiming performance, review the number of POPs or points of presence that they have deployed. Typically, the more, the better your performance is going to be, but latency is ultimately king. Remember that consolidation should mean simplification and not just another UTM, not just bringing features together for the sake of bringing features together. Consider again, for performance, decryption is going to be one of the most important things from a scalability perspective. So you have to make sure that the solution you're adopting supports all of the cipher suites, TLS 1.3, all the new changes related to TLS and SSL. Keep in mind their licensing models. Obviously, you wouldn't want to deploy a solution that's going to cut you off when you hit one more user than you're licensed for. Usually, you want a true up type model. And then finally, I'll just leave you with, you want to make sure that the capabilities that they're offering are across all of the use cases that you want to deploy. They may have a capability, but it might be limited to a specific mode of implementation or a specific mode of integration, or only supported on a certain SaaS application, right? These are all things that are worth vetting out. And again, that's why it's worth proof of concepting typically. So that's all I had.